Good morning and welcome to the County of Berrien on this lovely snowy day. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. Little housekeeping as a reminder, please silence or turn off all electronic devices as we conduct this morning's business. Any materials you wish to have distributed to the board, you can do so by giving it to our Sergeant of Arms, which is Commissioner Jim Kern here to my left. And during the appropriate times in the meeting, if you wish to address the board, you can do so by going to the podium, state your name, jurisdiction, and you'll have 2 minutes to address the board. With all that business taken care of, let's do roll call.
Bell. Curran.
Here.
Freeling.
Present.
Harrison.
Here.
Hinkleman.
Here.
Ott.
Here.
Pitchford. Tyler.
Here.
Woolrath.
Here.
Werfel.
Here.
Yarborough. And Elliott is out as well. So you have 4 absent and 8 present.
We have a quorum. Thank you very much. All right, with that, approval of the minutes from January 23rd, 2025. It says 2024 on our agenda. It's okay. So Commissioner Werfel has made the motion, supported by Commissioner Vollrath. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Minutes are approved. Requisition review.
Good morning. So you have 2 requisition reviews, one that was gonna come last week and one for this week. Does anybody have any questions about them?
I have a question. I was looking at the requisition for the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission.
Mhm.
And I was just curious, the members of the county board, are they getting, do you get paid to sit on that board or not? Because I know we're paying $32,406.
So the 32,000 is
Your
our
membership.
portion of the membership. We do receive a per diem. It's a split per diem between both what we have here for the board policy, but then there is an additional small per diem that comes from Southwest.
So you're getting paid twice.
We are not.
Mm-mm.
It makes up the $55 that we would typically receive for a regular meeting. But Southwest Michigan Planning Commission covers a portion of that. And then our board policy has that we cover another portion.
Yeah, the Southwest Michigan Planning pays them $35 for
Thank
their
you.
meeting per diem.
Uh-huh.
And then we balance that
Oh,
with the
then you
others.
supplement the remaining.
Exactly. And then their mileage is paid by Southwest Michigan Planning, not us.
Correct. I have one more question.
Sure.
I know we have a list of all the committees. Do we have a list of the committees what do supplement that we're aware of? I know we have a list, but I would like to know which ones do have that additional.
Sure.
I will get you a
Okay.
copy of the board and committee's handbook that has all of that information in it.
But I want to know which ones of
It
those
says it in
committees.
the very
It does
first
say
page.
which
Yep.
ones
Yep.
are,
Mhm.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you for your questions. Are there any other questions? I do know that there was one on this week's requisition list for Rev Excavating. Unfortunately, I don't have the rec number. I will be abstaining from that one. So Annette, I would need to
That'd be 76343 is
thank you.
the requisition number.
Thank you.
Yep.
That will be what I'll be abstaining from. It is for Rev Excavating. And again, I just abstain out of an abundance of caution. So that is all I needed to state. Any other discussion
'cause-
for requisition? That's going to make its way around the horn, and then in 10:30, we'll consider that for action. With that being said, I have here on the agenda, conflict of interest discussion. 2 of the members are missing.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we want to proceed with having Commissioner Tyler speak to hers, and then we can do that, and then we'll deal with Bell and Pitchford when they are present.
Just go ahead. Former county clerk and a former state rep. Also, I would like to mention that my daughter-in-law, Kristen Adams, wrote the grant for First Church of God. She is a licensed clinical social worker, certified advanced in drug and alcohol counselor for the state of Michigan. She is only paid for within that grant on an on-call need basis, not on the regular payroll. She's doing it mainly basis in a working partnership within First Church of God. The other, because of the law, I'm on the Berrien County Republican Board, and I'm also a board member of the Southwest Republican. And that's it.
All right, well, with that, we basically have to have you bring that to our attention, and then do we need to vote on that, Thaddeus, or?
No, there's no vote, just a
Yeah.
declaration of potential conflicts, and then
Absolutely.
obviously if there's business that would relate in the future, that's when the abstention would occur.
Thank you, appreciate that, and appreciate you disclosing those items so that we can be aware and transparent on those matters. All right, I did hear from Commissioner Bell, he's running late this morning. So hopefully he'll be coming later. With that being said, let's move on to scheduled discussion. And the first that we have on our agenda is Dan Fetty from Community Development to speak to us about the dredging permit and to give us an update on that.
Morning, everyone.
Yeah.
I'll be as brief as possible because I think Greg has more interesting information to talk to you about today. So I just want to give you an update on where we stand with trying to get a permit to dredge St. Joe River. You'll recall that last April, I believe it was, the board authorized our department to retain a consulting firm to prepare a permit application for the dredging of St. Joe River. Basically in the marina, I'll show you the marina district of the river around what we call Harbor Isle. We submitted that permit application at the very last week of May of last year. And about 3 weeks ago, Eagle finally issued the preliminary permit on this. Now it's not complete yet. We still have to get the Corps of Engineers to sign off on that permit. I talked to our counterparty at the Corps on Monday, and I was assured that their sign off would be forthcoming within the next few days. So with any luck, by the end of this month, we'll have a fully complete permit in hand, and then it'll trigger a series of activities that could allow for dredging of the river to occur this spring. Before I get into this, let me emphasize, we've been clear with the affected boating community that Berrien County is not paying for river dredging anymore. We're out of that business. If they want to do it, they can do it on their own, utilizing the permit that we've acquired on their behalf. So let me go through the conditions of the permit and you can see what will be allowed once this is final. The project is authorized by Eagle, allows for dredging of the St. Joe River to maintain navigability for recreational and commercial vessels. When I say commercial vessels, I'm really talking about commercial fishing boats, not the big ships that you see that come into the harbor every summer. That's a different aspect of dredging that's handled by the Corps of Engineers. The project includes both mechanical and hydraulic dredging methods and is designed to follow very strict environmental guidelines. This is just the permit number. Again, it's authorized both by Eagle and the Corps of Engineers. As I said, the Corps of Engineers is still reviewing the process. They're going through something called a Section 408 review, which I'll explain in a second. Is a little more complicated than what we're used to. Nonetheless, we expect that they should be issuing their sign off on the permit within the coming days. It allows for initially dredging up to 65,000 cubic yards of materials in the first 2 years of the permit period, and then additional 15,000 cubic yards of materials in years 3, 4, and 5. It's an enormous amount of material that could be potentially removed from the river. I mean, if you look at that, it's over 100,000 yards of material. You can do the calculations, but I think that you'd be able to fill up a football field, I think 60 feet deep under that standard. So it's a huge amount of material that could potentially be taken out of the river, cost permitting, of course. The two things that have slowed this permit process down a little bit are the methods of disposal that we requested in this permit. On the first instance, there's dewatering. In other words, you scoop the material out, you put it at some designated sites on the shoreline and allow it to dry out before it can be moved to its ultimate placement upland somewhere. The second method that and that's, by the way, that's a standard method of doing this, but it's cumbersome, it's expensive, and you kind of have to handle the material multiple times. The second method that we requested is hydraulic dredging, where the material would be turned into a slurry essentially, and then pumped all the way across the pier heads down to Lions Park Beach and used for beach nourishment down there. That's of course where the Corps of Engineers does their dredging. Okay, they stockpile the material down there hydraulically. We've asked for the same method here just because it's so much material that could potentially be taken out of the river. There's no place to store it on shore. We'd run out of room immediately. The other reason is the hydraulic method and beach nourishment method, even though it's more cumbersome to bring the pipes in and the lift stations and so forth, it's less than half the cost of doing it mechanically. So mechanical dredging could be, $35 to $60 a yard, whereas hydraulic dredging could be as little as $20 a yard. So it's a much cheaper method of doing it. It's just a little more cumbersome and it requires more Corps of Engineers permit review, and that's kind of what slowed the process down. So this is an example of where the dredging, everything you see highlighted here is basically part of the channel that could be created through this permit. It's essentially, obviously, just a single channel running upstream, downstream in the river. And then you can think about that as like kind of the roadway that we're permitted to have constructed. And then you see these little portions that enter into all the various marinas and public launch points. Those would be like the driveways that go in there. One of the other reasons I thought is because we initially just had our engineers design that river dredge drive or a roadway portion. But a number of the marinas contacted us and said, hey, if you're going to do this, can you also include areas that would allow us to access that, roadway, so to speak. So we had to do additional soil sampling and chemical analysis, and it just took a little bit longer than we expected. Although I should say parenthetically, we're not alone. Everyone doing these projects is taking months and months and months for them to get permits. I think Greg can attest to that. I know you guys worked on one for months, right? Yeah. Also the Morrison Channel, which is where Pier 33 Marina is, as well as the Harbor Isle Condominium Association at the tip of the island there. Will be allowed to have dredging activities all through the Morrison Channel. So essentially, if you think about it, it's just one large dredging project that circles that island, basically. This is a reference of where potentially the material could be hydrologically pumped. Again, across the pier heads down to Lions Park Beach, where it could be used for beach nourishment in that area. We're hoping that that's the method that ultimately is used because it's so much cheaper. And then here you see the temporary disposal sites. I don't know if I don't think the highlighter works. Maybe I can use the mouse, but no. Nope. Sorry. Oh, here we go. So this is one of the temporary disposal areas where you could scoop the material or pump the material and allow it to dewater. There's another one down here by Pier 1000. You can see they're relatively small areas and you can't really put that much material in there, which is a limiting factor for dredging. We have permission from both property owners to utilize those locations, or whoever is performing the dredging will be able to utilize those locations. Some of the standard requirements within a permit of this nature, you have to comply with Coastal Zone Management Program, which is that part of what you're talking about today or no?
In parallel.
Yeah, okay.
Completely compatible, but in
yeah. You can't perform any dredging from May to June 30th. This is the spawning season where you just can't disturb the bottomlands of the river. We still have to get, if there is going to be regulated placement of this material, we'd have to get local approval, but just John, as you and I were talking about this morning, most of this material can be placed on private property without local regulation. The one thing that is going to be a hang up is this right here, the mussel survey and potential relocation. This is a new requirement from previous times that we've done this. We never had to do this before, but there are an endangered species of mussels that potentially grows within this area of the river. Before dredging activities take place, you have to do a survey to determine whether or not those are present in the area to be dredged, and if so, how are you going to relocate them? Now, if someone were to do the entire project, the 100,000 yards, they would have to do a mussel survey. What we are going to try to work through in the next few weeks is work with DNR to identify the habitat areas and pre-screen those as not likely to contain mussels, because most of it is just accumulated river sand. Because we're looking at areas that have been previously dredged recently, our expectation is that DNR will waive the full survey requirement in order to do limited dredging this spring. But if we're going to have a huge dredging program in the future, mussel survey will have to be conducted at some point. So again, we are the permit holder. We're responsible for oversight and compliance. Anyone dredging under this permit, we will have to have our team kind of supervising it, making sure it's done and consistent with the permit. And then we have reporting requirements to both the state and federal governments with post-dredge activities. And again, just to reiterate what I just said, I mean, annual reporting and compliance with permit conditions. We've done this before, and it's really not that complicated for us to do. So as it stands right now, we expect within a couple of weeks, maybe shorter than that, maybe just a week, we'll have full authorization from both Eagle and the Corps for dredging activities to commence. I've talked to the marina owners and other affected recreational boating community members and let them know that if they want to dredge this spring, they should start preparing for that work. We will work with them to identify the areas where they'd like to dredge and try to get pre-clearance of those areas so that the full mussel survey doesn't have to take place until later on this summer. In addition to that, I think Brian handed out a news article that just appeared today in the Herald Palladium about Benton Harbor. It appears to be willing to move forward in the creation of a harbor authority. We drafted articles of incorporation for a new harbor authority and gave those articles to St. Joe Township and Benton Harbor last May and said, this is the way to move forward is adopt these articles, create a new authority, use that authority to coordinate dredging activities. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of movement on that until just a month or two, must have been a month ago. We finally got a meeting together with all the communities and said, look, the need is coming. This river's going to have to be dredged. The only way to really coordinate it in a long-term capacity is to have a standing permanent body comprised of the community members that can help offset costs, raise money, levy assessments, whatever the case may be. But we've encouraged them. The time is now to create this new authority and get it stood up so that when the demand for dredging begins to occur, there's a body that can help coordinate those activities. So I'm hopeful that the city approves these articles next week. And then I'm also hopeful that St. Joe Township and City of St. Joe will do the same shortly thereafter. Okay.
Thank you, Madam.
Will there be county commissioners on this board also?
Now, Commissioner, we drafted the article specifically so that it was a local only authority. You may recall that we've talked about in the past that the county has offered to provide administrative support and oversight for this authority for a period of up to 3 years to help them kind of get their feet wet, learn what they're doing. I fully anticipate that'll be my department that'll provide that assistance to them. But the idea was, this really is a local issue. It's not a county-wide issue. It deals with a recreational community that's basically comprised of marinas in these 3 communities. So it's their program in a sense to own, but we're there to help them as they do that. Okay.
Thank you. I was on that board.
We terminated our harbor authority in I believe it's 2015. Okay, and we told the communities at that time it would behoove them to create their own local authority as soon as possible. A lot of things have intervened since 2015, but Dave, I'm hopeful that they do it now and that by summertime you have a functioning authority that can start assisting the voting community.
Commissioner Tyler.
Use your mics when you're asking questions, please.
If they don't create their own authority, would the county consider going back and creating again?
The problem with that,
There's definitely a need.
so here's the reason we got out of it to begin with. 2 reasons. First of all, the county has no land use regulatory power in this area. We can't say what can be constructed, where it can be constructed, or how it should be maintained. That's a matter of local zoning. So we have no ability to control what happens along the shoreline. The second, more pertinent issue is the county does not have independent tax assessing authority. Okay, we can't just create, say, a tax assessment district or a special assessment district, collect money and use that to fund activities like dredging. Only the local communities have the power to create those assessment districts. And frankly, the only way that a long-term dredging project will work is if there is a consolidated special assessment district that levies a fee on users, like a water and sewer system, right? Collects those fees and use those fees to defray the cost of dredging. We don't have the independent power to do that. We can do that, but only with contract agreements of the local communities that they will collect the assessments on our behalf. So, you know, unfortunately, this is a situation where the county government just doesn't have jurisdiction or power to really affect any improvement there. It has to be done by the local communities. We can help, but we can't be the driving force behind it.
Are there any other questions? We do have another presentation that tie bars into some of this. If you have questions, I'm sure that Dan will be happy to take them. He's often in his office or walking around with a coffee cup, smiling, saying, good morning, sleeping under your desk. No. The authority was dissolved end of 2020 or 2016. Yeah, so, well, with no other questions, we do have another presentation. We have Greg Wykamp from Edgewater, correct? We'd love for you to come on up, but Brian, I'll turn it
Yeah,
over to
members
you.
of the board, this is something that no immediate action will be needed by you all, but it's really an interesting topic. So just a few years ago, this board was asked to approve work to occur at Silver Beach to essentially provide some reinforcement, some shoring up to ensure that we didn't lose all of our beach and the city street didn't fall into the lake. So time flies and you've seen the ups and downs of the lake. Greg's going to talk with you all about some of the work that his firm has been doing in conjunction with the local units in the state of Michigan. Really, really interesting topic. Greg, ready?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Greg Wykamp with Edgewater Resources. We're based right here, right across the street, or the hall from Rybell, straight downtown. Been here for about 15 years. And we are a coastal engineering planning design firm and work on projects like this. And we're asked to help lead a team to explore a couple of key things. We're all familiar with the shoreline issues and the dredging and the erosion. We were looking at exploring potential new strategies for solving that in a long-term way that gets away from the hardened armoring of the shoreline. That's definitely where everybody is going in terms of a permitting standpoint, environmental conditions. Generally, when we put that armoring up, it has a pretty significant negative effect on the environment and actually causes the need for more armoring and spending more money. So it's actually kind of a negative thing. The funding was through Michigan EDC and cooperation with the City of St. Joe and Berrien County, Great Lakes Coalition, and Representative Andrews. The team included Dr. Guy Meadows and his team up at Michigan Tech, Mike Morphy at Avonmarsh, Seaworks. So everybody, all local firms with the exception of the folks from Michigan Tech to put this together. So the basic introduction of the issue, and you're all generally familiar with a lot of this, is that we have what's called littoral drift, which is sand that moves down the shoreline. That's where our sand comes from. We all might walk out on the beach and feel like it's this static thing, but it's really a river of sand that's constantly moving north to south. And that's what those yellow lines indicate. What we have at more of a local level is where the sand comes from, is it comes off of it comes off of the beach. So as the flow and the currents move down, the sand gets drawn off the shoreline and it creates the sort of flow. And it will continue south until it hits an obstacle like a navigational pier. And that's why you can see on the north side, we always have, if you look at Google or sometime, you'll always see that the beach is bigger on the north side of the river, of the navigation structures, on the south side. And that accumulation occurs in part because we're blocking that sand. And then what happens is that sand gets pushed offshore and less amount of sand continues on to the south. So in a natural process, if we hadn't built the structures, that sand would keep on going and it would keep on nourishing the beach all the way down. What's happening now is that sand gets pushed offshore and it actually accumulates. There's a thing called the depth of closure. That sand moves in the current, but once the water gets to about 20 feet deep, the sand starts to fall out of the water column and it just ends up on the bottom and we lose it out of the flow that goes south. So the problem is once it's out of that flow, it's kind of lost forever. We don't get it back into that pattern. And that's why we have the sand starvation that you see on the south sides. So a little bit less happens. And so ultimately it looks like this. You get a lot of sand coming in and you get less sand going down after these structures. So what we're asked to do, and this is a great photo here, this might actually be the video. Oop, guess not. Sorry, go back here. So what you're seeing in this photo, you can see the North Pier, the very left side there. This isn't exactly true. This is actually a lighter material than the sand we're talking about, but it's a really great visual representation of what's happening with the currents. So this is from a summer day a few years ago. Big winds out of the north, and it just pushes down. You get these currents, and it pushes it out offshore. So what we want to get to is looking at the options. So the existing shoreline protection strategy we have is to do nothing. We all know what happens when you do nothing. Eventually, either the water goes down like it did in 2013, and we have a sort of a reprieve from the issues, or the water comes up like it did in 2018, 19, 20, and we have huge erosion issues. So we can do beach nourishment, exactly what Dan just talked about, exactly what the Corps does, put the sand out in front, and that works great. That's actually one of the best strategies. The only problem with beach nourishment is it's like spreading $100 bills on the beach and watching them blow away. It's a natural process. So the sand goes there and then it naturally moves south. Nothing is wrong. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And the beach nourishment is essentially an artificial strategy to do what nature was doing before we put in the structures. So everything Dan just described earlier is actually completely compatible with what we're doing here in terms of what I'm going to show you and talk about. Placing it on the beach is completely compatible, and that's a good thing. You also see what we call soft armoring, which is the sandbags and the geotubes. And you saw a lot of this 5-6 years ago when the water was really high. And then you have armor stone in the walls, the steel walls that you see at Lions Park Beach, for example. In terms of, this is 2013, that's Discordia Beach looking south. And that was a storm about a year later in 14. And so you can see how rapidly the water levels can change. Remember those days. This is the chart of the water levels. If you're not familiar with this, basically what you're seeing at the top are different years. So this is the year of 23, 24, and this is where we are right now. The red line is actual water levels. The blue line, blue dashed, is the long-term average. And then these things you see here, you can barely see them. There's our years. That will tell you that that was the year that in March, the highest water level in March ever, in the last 120, oops, hold on, wrong buttons. That highest level occurred in that month. Sorry, I was hitting a button there apparently. And so what that's telling us right now is that we're kind of under long-term average, and that shaded area is what the projections say would likely happen in that next 6-month period. So this coming year, we're about maybe 6 inches below long-term average. It could, depending on weather conditions, could reach back to the average. So it's not low right now. It feels low because it was so high, but we're basically right around long-term average. So we studied all of this, of course, and this is taken into consideration with everything we talk about. This is the average, this is the measurement. The blue in this case is the actual water level over the last 106 years. So what we want to look at in terms of shoreline armoring, what the permitting agencies and the Corps of Engineer are looking for is we want to get more to the softer side of things and less of the harder side of things. And that's a lot of advantage to their, this stuff is very expensive and it takes away that sand that would otherwise keep coming down. So this is what hydraulic dredging looks like. This is what Dan was describing, and it's basically a big pipe sucking, 90% water and 10% material up, and it pushes it on the beach. And it's a very effective strategy, and it's very cost effective. And this is what it looks like right there at the north end of Lions Park Beach, and they spread the sand out. So that's a positive thing, and that's exactly the strategy that would be what Dan was describing. This is exactly what it would look like and how it would happen. And when that works, it's great. Here we go. We actually have the video. Sorry, it's moving a little slowly there. So there's nothing wrong with this strategy. Particularly, we always make sure that it's clean material, that there's no heavy metals or contaminants in there, that sort of thing. So what's the challenge with beach nourishment? It can be expensive if you're importing sand. If you're moving it through hydraulic means, it's actually about $10 to $12 a cubic yard. Very, very, very affordable. If you're trying to import, it's maybe 5, 6, 10 times that price. So we don't do it that way. There's an inconsistent federal funding schedule, and it's relatively short-lived. It only lasts for a year or two, just depending on weather. It is a very good solution. It's the natural process that would have occurred. What's wrong with the armoring? It's very, very expensive. It impacts neighboring properties. You just mobilizing the equipment is a huge challenge. Most importantly is once I armor that shore, I can't pull sand from that shore into the drift pattern anymore. And that gives me less sand downstream and creates more issues downstream. So we're spending a bunch of money to armor ashore, which then makes it less likely that it makes it more likely that the properties downstream have to armor. And once one person puts in armoring, if the neighbor doesn't, we get what we call flanking, and it causes erosion around it, which is exactly why the city of St. Joe wrote their ordinance to prevent additional armoring in certain places and to pull properties back so you don't need to armor. It's the right strategy. You don't, once you armor, you're permanently spending money on that forever. So we really don't want to do that. So what to do? What are the options? Of course, we used to have tons of ice. When we have a lot of ice in the wintertime, it actually protects the shoreline from waves. We're getting less and less ice, so we're getting more erosion. So kind of skip past this a second here. So more rapidly changing water levels with climate change, more storm intensity, more frequency, a little bit less ice cover leaves shorelines more exposed, and it's all less predictable. Back in 2010, the best climate projections were that the water was going to go down, stay down, and keep going down. Now what we're finding is it's likely to stay in that long-term historic average. It's just going to be a lot more volatile. We used to go up and down in these long 10, 15, 20-year cycles. Now we went from a record low to a record high in 6 years. So a lot of volatility, and we need to be prepared for that. This is the shoreline project Brian mentioned at the south end of Silver Beach. Right now, if you were to go out there, that's probably 50, 60 yards from the lake edge. That's not a strategy we would like to do. We prefer to do, sorry. But in some cases, that's the only thing that's available because we have no space and we have to protect the infrastructure. Lions Park Beach, of course, we're all familiar with the steel that's there. Certainly not an ideal kind of a beach environment. It's there, of course, because we're not getting enough sand. We have to protect the water plant and all those things. What we're trying to get to is what can you do besides that, besides these strategies? So we have a softer beach. And the answer to that is looking at more nourishment, but finding a cheaper location, a cheaper source. And one of those sources is that sand that I described earlier that gets pushed off the beach and drops on the lake bed. It's still sitting there. In Florida and other states, they grab that sand and they put it back on the beach. The Corps of Engineers used to do this until they lost funding in the 90s to do the bypassing. The other idea is once we've done that, is how do you keep it there so it doesn't keep flowing downstream? So we'll look at some new strategies. So you're used to seeing big, long, continuous breakwaters. The strategy we're moving towards now is what we call segmented breakwaters or detached breakwaters. This is a project my partner designed down on the Intercoastal Waterway. And all of these things provide equivalent protection as a continuous breakwater. But what it does is a couple of other things is it creates a lot of habitat features. It allows better water circulation, so better water quality. So we're not creating stagnation on the beach that could create issues. And it's also just as effective in terms of wave protection. So we can actually model this in the computer. Our team can do all this work in the computer, and then sometimes we do physical modeling to prove it out. And then what you can see here is that's that marina, and you can see the sediment just rolls right through. Once it's built, you can see the sediment is directed around. Okay, so that makes sense. What's cool about that is this is all this way is to make in this case and away from the door on the door. Well, recently part of the state of Illinois, these were constructed very specific to is make the sand actually that's northing southward, and sand will come in and actually turns the corner and goes back to the beach. So when you look at this photo, the wave energy is actually coming in from the northwest. And when the wave comes in here, you can see how the waves turn like this. Those that turn of the wave movement, we can actually control it and define it by how we shape these structures and make the sand come in. So no mechanical equipment like that. navigational structures that can help direct that sand back to the beach and protect it. It's important to know that the sand will never actually reach out to these structures. We're not just simply moving the armoring out and then having the beach fill into it. The physics of this is such that the sand, we can actually define exactly where the sand will end up. And that beach will eventually fill back to about this area here. And then once that reaches equilibrium, the sand just continues on by. So it's a really interesting strategy. It allows us to protect the beach. It allows us to maintain water circulation and keep the beach nourishment in place, keep the sand in place, and actually direct some of the sand that goes by in place to maintain it by itself in the future. So we're not going to have to continuously renourish this. So these are strategies that are used. This is actually over in the Detroit River. It's been done over here. These are strategies that have been used around the country in various locations, in many other states. We haven't done it in Michigan yet. I don't want anybody to construe this as that Eagle is opposed to this. They're not. It's just that we have some complicating factors with permitting here. First of all, every landowner, if we were to put anything in front of the property, even beach nourishment, every landowner has to give permission. And that can get complicated because you'll need one person to say no. In this case, in this study, the purpose of this study was to say, if we were ever to do a pilot project, where could we do it? And the fact is this entire stretch from the, thank you, from the water plant up to the piers, public ownership, either the county or the city. And so we could theoretically, if we get to that point, have the proper land ownership to pursue this. Once we get it established, we have to establish a permitting review process that EGLE can say, we've now done our due diligence and say this is going to be a better environmental impact than a negative impact. So their first question was, okay, you want to grab sand off the lake bed and put it over here. Well, everybody thinks sand on the bottom isn't habitat, but it can be. Well, they asked us to prove that it wasn't habitat, so we did the surveys and the photography. We do the same thing as to where the sand might go, and we've documented those things. So ultimately, we've in working with EGLE, we've proven that we can do this and it can be permitted because we're not going to have these negative impacts. So they asked us to develop concept alternatives. We did a preliminary application meeting with them to discuss it. Moving forward, if this does move forward, we would do the preliminary engineering and actually submit the permit application to EGLE and the Corps, which is exactly what Dan just went through, the same exact process. And so to do that work, we collected bathymetry, which is basically it's like topography, but under the water. We know where the water is. We collected sediment samples. We did photography. We analyzed the wave climate and the quality of the materials for beach nourishment. And all of these things worked out well in terms of supporting the goal. And so what we would do is, this is the bathymetry. So now we know exactly what the water depths are in various locations. And by the way, we know where the water plant intake is. We're nowhere near that. We actually put, Dr. Meadows and the Michigan Tech team put that torpedo looking thing underwater. It's actually an underwater UAV with photography. And so those bands that you see are transects where we took all photos. So we showed this to EGLE and we said, we can show you that the sand is sitting here. We took photography, can show you, and looking at it with the fisheries folks, are like, yeah, that's clearly not habitat. So we proved that out and did the same thing there. So that was the purpose of these exercises. Show that the sand is there and that it's not a habitat concern. And then we did the wave climate studies. These are called wind roses. And what you're seeing is the farther out it goes is the more intense it is and the frequency. So that is a measure of intensity and frequency. So clearly we're not so worried about this angle. We are worried about that angle, for example. And we're less worried about from the due west. Imagine this is a spot on the beach and this is where the biggest waves come from. And that all makes sense with our prevailing wind and wave conditions. So we studied those and then came up with, okay, where are the sandbars? Can we move that sand from up off the piers and put it and do beach nourishment on Lions Park and in this area? And if we were to look at adding potentially, so we could just do one thing. We could just grab the sand from up here and do nothing else but do nourishment here. That would last for a year or two every time we did it. It's the cheapest possible source. The question and the issue then would be a continuing source of funding to do that. We don't have that continuous source of funding. So this strategy says, do that nourishment or do Dan's project and move it to that beach and pre-nourish and then do whatever the structures might be to help keep that nourishment in place. And those different colored lines tell us where the beach will be in this various numbers of years. So this is both protecting what's there and also directing some of the sand to accumulate on the beach. That was one concept we looked at. This is another one with less structure, and we did a third one. So we've explored these different strategies and determined that they're feasible, that they would function properly, and that they wouldn't have a significant negative impact. There'd be a tremendous more amount of engineering to be done if this were to move forward, but this is the general principle of the process. So hopefully in the future, we would be able to have this out here and we'd be able to not have all of that steel there. And we'd have more of a soft shoreline, better habitat for everything. So that's the strategy. That's about a year's worth of work in about 15 minutes. And we'll entertain questions.
I know that we are tight on schedule, but Greg, thank you so much for your presentation. I see several hands that are up. There were a couple over on this side. Commissioner Warfel, we'll take a couple of questions.
Just what is the cost of those kinds of structures? And is there grant funding with Eagle or anything like that to cover any of those costs?
Sure. We're not far enough down the path to do accurate cost estimates. So that one that you saw in Fort Pierce around the marina, everything, including that big green island, was about $19 million. So we would need to do a lot of engineering in terms of exact depths and volume of stone to give you an accurate estimate. In terms of grant funding, certainly this is a strategy from a coastal zone management perspective. Everybody, Corps, Eagle, everyone else is looking for an alternate strategy from hardening the shoreline. So we'd be optimistic we'd be able to get some funding.
Commissioner Harrison and then Commissioner Tyler.
With the going up and going down of Lake Michigan, what, if you put the structures in, what happens when the lake goes up?
Sure.
Is that a hazard to the boating community?
So first of all, these aren't areas where there's not a tremendous amount of navigation in that close. And we would clearly have to do some aids to navigation in there. And we would design them, whenever we design this, we design it at the low and the high water levels and test between. So we would tested that they'll function whatever the water level is. And then clearly at some levels, we're going to have more aids to navigation. And that is definitely one of the trade-offs we have, but it's not out in an area where there's a lot of navigation now.
Do these reefs, as I'll call them a reef, become a natural source for fish and game as far as, a new structure for them?
Yes, sir, they do. One of the things that in that design process, we work with fisheries and we work with ecologists to say, what are the specific species we want to encourage and what do they need? And that comes down to like specific cobble size and little pockets. And so there's more to this presentation. If you want the whole thing, there's actually recorded when it's about an hour. If you have trouble sleeping, but it shows some thought process of how we can insert pockets of smaller type of stones and different things to target certain species. So very much intentionally to support habitat.
Commissioner Tyler.
Okay, I have two questions. So how often do you have to maintain that reef?
Well, that's the idea. Everything needs maintenance, but it's a lot less than, what we design them, the stone size and things that would hold it in place. Certainly.
So 10 years, 20?
It depends more on the size of the storms and frequency of the storm. So we would design it for 30 to 50 year life.
Then my second question, you said, you made the comment where the sand might go. As we have shoreline all the way down to New Buffalo and we have a nuclear plant, how does that sand, is it a worse situation down in the New Buffalo area than it is here, or is it better?
So the result of this is what we would have is these things stabilize and they reach a point of equilibrium where the sand then continues to just bypass. And so we'd be in no different in the situation than we are today. So the idea is we do nourishment either from the river or from the source of sand off the end of the pier. We put it on the beach, we protect it with the offshore structures, and then some of it will continue on and some of it continues south. So this exact strategy could be applied at anywhere along the lakeshore. So this is a test pilot, but New Buffalo could do it, Holland could do it, Grand Haven could do it. We're not going to have a big negative effect downstream.
Commissioner Yarbrough.
Yes, we put something on Park Street because the street was falling in. Is that in the path of this? Will that be nourished by the sand that's coming in? Is it working?
Well, yeah, so are we talking about the south end of Silver Beach?
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be a part of this whole process is when that whole process is done, we'd be looking all the way up. So there's that's about the point where the starvation actually starts to really take effect, where we've got the structures up. So it would consider that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you all for your questions, and Greg, thank you for your time this morning. Greatly appreciate it. I'm sure we'll hear more on it as we come closer to having to have those discussions. So with that being said, I open it up for public comments. Anyone from the public that wishes to address the board, please do so by coming to the podium. They're rushing. Everybody see that? They're coming right up there. No. Well, thank you again. With that, so we're gonna adjourn.